good to hear that music. Good to have you with us, folks, here on this Thursday edition of Ed Schultz News and Commentary from the North Country. Actually just got back from the North Country in Canada doing a little fishing for a few days. Good to be with you, and got home last night and watched with interest the Donald Trump extended interview on CNN. This is brought to you by Communication Workers of America, Alliance for American Manufacturing, BioGreen Clean, and the iSave team. If you like what you're seeing and hearing, I ask you to pass it around to your friends. You'll find this at WeGotEd.com, RawStory.com, and RingOfFireRadio.com. And I've had some other opportunities, and I'm just sitting back waiting to see what's going to happen, and I'm enjoying life. And I appreciate you checking in with what we are producing here, and it's only going to get better time and time again, day after day. We're building. All right, so I watched with interest last night the Donald Trump interview on CNN. Number one, it's smart programming because it's giving the American people a real inside look at Trump in an hour-long interview, which is a kind of programming that I think that viewers are going to need. But in the midst of doing long interviews comes a little hitch in the giddy-up, so to speak. There was one thing in the interview last night that really caught my attention, and this is a concept. And this is what I think is playing into the popularity of Trump right now. He says things that are appealing to people, but he leaves the detail off to the side of the road. And it's about oil. And it's about ISIS. And it's something that not everybody at the dinner table talks about. It's something that not everybody at the water cooler at work talks about. But it is something that's on the minds of the American people. Number one, what are we going to do about ISIS? And number two, what about our veterans? And what about these warriors commercials that we're seeing on TV that leave the impression that we're not taking care of those who have lost their limbs and had their lives disrupted and are affected for the rest of their lives? And so Trump plays into this by saying that, well, he would handle ISIS and that he would take the oil and give it to the families of the loved ones that were lost. Now, who could sit there and watch this and say, well, that's a dumb idea? No, it appeals to people's emotion. It appeals to their heart and soul of being an American. It's a take your shirt off your back moment and give it to those who have sacrificed. But the devil in the detail is, okay, now what are we going to do that we have this oil? Here's the sound cut that I found that I think is somewhat of a soft underbelly that would be a great debate question for Trump. How are you going to logistically do this? Here's the sound cut.
Well, I'd like to take the oil and I'd give a lot of money to the people that were, to the families of the people that were killed, to the incredible wounded warriors that are all over the place. I love these people. These are the greatest people, and they're living in hell. And I'd give lots of money to them, their families. I mean, look at all the people. We spent $2 trillion, thousands of people killed, thousands, tens of thousands of wounded. We have nothing. Right now, Iran is going to take over Iraq, and ISIS has already taken big parts of the wealthy section of Iraq.
Would it be worth creating more wounded veterans in order to do what you want to do there?
Well, I see what I would do. You wouldn't have that many, I will tell you. I would just take over the source of their wealth. A big source of their wealth is the oil.
So the United States would get in the oil business. Now, this is a business guy talking. This is a guy who's done multiple deals daily in his career for decades. And in his mind, it's, oh, well, hell, we'll just take the oil. Okay, is the United States Oil Company now being formed under the Trump administration? Are we now going to go head-to-head with the multinationals? Is it going to be kind of like the Bank of North Dakota? I mean, come on. Wait a minute. We're going to get this oil. We're just going to give it to Chevron. What do you say we give it to Exxon? Wait a minute. Let's give it to BP, and maybe they can pay us back for the way they screwed us down in the Gulf. I mean, the devil in the detail is not there. So the United States military would take over the oil fields, and then what are we going to do with it? And what is the logistical nightmare of deciding who gets money and what family doesn't, and how much are they going to get? I mean, these are things that Trump has to explain to the American people. Now, he explained the emotion of it. He loves these people. He loves these warriors. He knows that we got nothing for it, and we spent trillions of dollars. The soundbite is golden. The concept is very connecting to the American people, but the logistical resource of all of this is missing. The United States of America Oil Company, that's a dandy. Does that mean it's going to get speculated on Wall Street? Does that mean that the United States is now going to go in the oil business and we're going to have a state-run oil company and we're going to go head-to-head? And does that mean that your gas prices are going to drop back to $1.50 a gallon because, hell, we stole all the oil from ISIS? Come on, Trump. You got to go a little bit deeper than that. But I will say this. As it stands right now, Trump is in very good command of himself in interviews. He knows who he is. He knows what he wants, and he's communicating that extremely well. And as it stands right now, as I see it, guy's going to get the nomination. I don't see any of these other bozos knocking him off the pedestal. I don't see any of these guys, unless they get into the devil in the details and force Trump to explain, and he's media savvy enough to be able to come up with answers. The other thing about Trump, look, the learning curve is definitely there. This guy is going to have a much better debate coming up on September 16th on CNN than the one he had back on Fox. And yes, I do believe that the ratings are going to be tremendous on that. There's another soft underbelly issue here that I think Trump has to explain. Trump is talking about China and Mexico, but he never talks about the World Trade Organization, and he never talks about already negotiated deals, which he thinks he's a master of, already negotiated trade agreements that we have to adhere to. Now, on my podcast just this week, I did Leo Gerard, who is the president of International Steelworkers. He, in detail, explains exactly how American workers are getting screwed. You know what, Mr. Trump? You need to get schooled up on exactly what's happening to American workers. It's not just that we're losing jobs because labor gets paid too much. That's bullshit. That's not it. What it is that we have entered into trade agreements, and we're about to enter into another trade agreement that is going to circumvent American law. And I don't get any detail out of Trump on these two issues. Here's his soundbite last night, the interview talking about other countries ripping our jobs off.
I'll be the greatest jobs president that God ever created. I'll take them back from China, from Japan, from Mexico, which is doing an incredible job. Their leaders are much smarter than our leaders. They're taking tremendous industry. If you look, Nabisco just announced they're building a big plant. They're leaving Chicago. Nabisco, I mean, how American can you get? Nabisco is building a big plant in Mexico. Ford is building a $2.5 billion factory, car plant, manufacturing plant for cars, trucks, and parts in Mexico.
How do you keep them?
You keep them by...
Because the labor's cheap, that's why they go.
For one thing, you keep them by talking to them.
Hold it. I just go crazy when I hear this. He's not addressing currency manipulation by the Chinese, which last week was just a huge story. He's not addressing the lack of immediacy when it comes to addressing imbalances in trade and also disputes that unfold in the labor industry, whether it be steel or glass or rubber or tire or electronics or any of this. And one of the reasons why Ford is doing what they're doing is because they're skirting the rules. Look, this detail may or may not catch up with Trump because we have a media that deals in short sound bites. And he understands that. But you can't skirt the devil in the detail on exactly when you bring a trade case to the WTO because China is cheating or Mexico is cheating. It takes years to get resolution on this. By that time, the jobs are gone. So, Mr. Trump, what are you going to do about lousy trade agreements? And what is going to be your method of restitution to restore these jobs when we know that there's currency manipulation, when we know that there's cheating going on, when we know that there's dumping on our market? And how are you going to restore all of that balance and keep Wall Street happy? This is the core of what Bernie Sanders has been talking about and what Hillary is not talking about. So eventually, The soft underbelly for the Republican candidates are these two issues to force Trump to come out and talk about, okay, what about trade? And what about this new state oil company that you want to run called United States Oil? I'm just giving it a name. But what else are you going to do? Is he going to give the oil to one multinational and piss off the other multinationals? There's no there there. There's no there in detail. So, and then there's great sound bites about Hillary's email. This is Trump in another way using the media and pounding on Hillary Clinton on her email, which I think is apropos, which I think fits. Because she has a lot of questions to answer, but this is now a new twist. And he's smart enough to throw this out there, talking about possible criminal charges.
I think that Hillary's going to have a hard time being in the election based on what's happening with the emails, the servers, maybe even the speeches. I think it's going to be a very hard thing for her to overcome. When I look, Chris,
hold it right there. Hold it right there. The Republican Party needs to recognize that Trump is doing them a huge favor by bringing up the thought of criminal charges. Trump isn't down at 2% in the polls. Trump isn't down there at 5%. Trump is leading the pack in every poll. Trump is going to be leading the pack for a long time. The fact is that he is owning the camera. He is owning the headlines in the media cycle, and he's talking about exactly what the Republicans want to hear. Something's wrong with Hillary Clinton. Oh, by the way, there could be criminal charges. I apologize. I interrupted. Play it again. I just go nuts on this.
I think that Hillary's going to have a hard time being in the election based on what's happening with the emails, the servers, maybe even the speeches. I think it's going to be a very hard thing for her to overcome. When I look, Chris, at what happened with Petraeus on a much smaller level, great general, wonderful guy, everybody loves him, and they've destroyed his life over much less. I mean, in terms of confidentiality, in terms of importance, much less and far fewer. And it would seem hard to think that somebody could have a much worse situation than him and escape. And what's the purpose of it? You know, it's always skirting the edge. What's the purpose of it? In the end, she had something in mind. She didn't want people to know or something. But what is she doing? Why is she doing it? I think it's devastating for the election, but I think her bigger problem is not the election. I think her bigger problem is going to be the criminal problem. Look, it's either criminal or it's incompetent. It's one or the other. There's either gross incompetence or criminal, and neither's acceptable to be president.
Have you heard any other Republican candidate package it any better than what Trump just did on Hillary Clinton's problems? That is the biggest Christmas gift that they've had in a long time, and they ought to be able to use that over and over again. They all ought to be singing. I mean, if they want to beat Hillary, if they want to knock her down a notch, if they really want to run against Bernie Sanders or anybody else, I mean, he is doing the Republicans a favor. Now, something that has not been pointed out in all of this since Trump announced. The meat of his campaign has been illegal immigration, and he's been very dogmatic about it. International intervention, what he was for, what he was against, and how his predictions came true. His tax issue, his business issues, all of that stuff. You know whose campaign this parallels? Patrick Buchanan. It's almost as if Pat Buchanan is the lead advisor or talking on the QT to Donald Trump. This is what you got to say about illegal immigration. This is what I did 15, 20 years ago. They thought I was nuts, but now they're listening to you. Trump is running a Pat Buchanan campaign across the board. This production is brought to you by the Communication Workers of America, Alliance for American Manufacturing, BioGreen Clean, and the iSave team. More after this. Hey, folks, you've heard me talk about BioGreen Clean. I'm going to show you right now on my airplane just how tough this is. I want you to keep in mind, chemical-free, 100% plant-derived, biodegradable. It is the safest cleaner that you can get, and it's the most effective. Go to our website, wegotid.com, or go to biogreenclean.com. www.biogreenclean and order today.
We perpetuate a culture of crime all the way from Wall Street right down to the main street in our hometowns. It's worse than it has been since FDR took control of the problem and said we can't count on industry taking care of the American labor. They probably have already engaged into some type of criminal cover-up, and the law prohibits the government from even doing anything about it.
Catch America's lawyer Mike Papantonio on YouTube at youtube.com/GoLeftTV.
Subscribe to the Ed Schultz podcast today. Simply log on to iTunes, search for Ed Schultz, and click the subscribe button to have the show delivered to your preferred listening device daily, free of charge. Rate and review the podcast to tell us how we're doing. More details at wegoted.com.
Good to have you with us here on this Thursday edition of Ed Schultz News and Commentary at wegoted.com, rawstory.com, ringofireradio.com. The most visibility that Jeb Bush has had of late came yesterday when he was holding a town hall meeting 13 miles away from Donald Trump. And there was just big buildup in the news. Whoa, they're having town halls not very far from one another. And Bush is attacking Trump, saying that he used to be a liberal, used to be a Democrat, and he supported liberal causes like health care and also higher taxes on the wealthy. And he's trying to paint himself as the big conservative. One of the things that no one predicted was someone was going to be able to raise as much money as Bush has raised so far through a super PAC and do so little with it. He is just watching Trump suck the air out of the room. And so what do the home folks think about this in Florida? I'm curious about how is Jeb Bush playing in his own state and what he's saying and how his campaign's doing against the front-runner Trump. Annette Taddeo joins us, longtime friend of mine. She's running for Congress in Florida's 26th district, and she ran for lieutenant governor. She's been very active in Democratic politics for years. Annette, good to have you with us.
It's great to be with you, Ed.
What is happening with Jeb Bush? I mean, how is he playing out in Florida? What's the coffee shop conversation about why he's not doing better in the polls with the resources that he has?
Just two words, Donald Trump. Donald Trump is definitely sucking the oxygen, but what's really sad is I think people expected, even those of us who don't agree with everything Jeb Bush says, we expected a little more leadership from him and from anyone who is supposedly pro-immigration. I mean, it took him 3 weeks to say anything when Donald Trump announced and called Mexican immigrants rapists and killers. I mean, that's not leadership. So there is a big deflation of a balloon that was created by that lack of understanding and that lack of leadership and standing up for us. He's married to a Mexican American, and in now just even when he claims he wants to, I mean, I'm talking about Donald Trump now, when he starts talking about the 14th Amendment, we got to do away with it. We got the entire pack of all of them seem to be following him to the bottom of the barrel, following Trump to the bottom of the barrel, instead of leading and saying, you know what, we are a nation of immigrants and we are here, all of us in one way or another have contributed to this country being the great country that it is, and by demonizing one group is certainly not the way to lead.
Well, Bush is trying to mop this up. He's done a few radio interviews, and he says he supports granting birthright citizenship to children of immigrants. But then he goes on to talk about fraud. He goes on to talk about, the different abuses that take place that he wants to crack down on. Is that going to be good enough? Is his stance to support the 14th Amendment going to be strong enough?
No, because in a radio interview just yesterday, he was talking about, yes, we need to look at these things, and then he mentioned, even by word, he said anchor babies. And that is just so absolutely insulting. These are not anchor babies, these are babies. And for a party that claims to be caring about babies, they seem to have different standards for different babies. All of these are babies that we should, welcome. And by the way, interestingly enough, some of them that are running would be affected by this. Marco Rubio's parents were not citizens when he was born in the United States. Yeah. We got Ted Cruz, who was born in Canada. We got the Louisiana governor, with the same situation. So I mean, it's just like within their own, defense, they're not defending themselves.
Annette Taddeo, you're on the cutting edge of, I think, where the minorities and Latino community in this country are. This is, and put into words, how big a letdown for the community when Bush does not respond, when Bush takes so long and then almost parcels his words on this and is not as direct. One thing about Trump, he is direct, and so is Ted Cruz. And so is Ben Carson. And this directness seems to be something that's appealing to the rabid base of the Republicans. And if Jeb Bush wants to grab them, he's almost pacifying them to a sense, but he's not coming out strong enough. And I guess the word I'm looking for is inclusive. Is he missing the inclusiveness that's going to be needed for him to garnish a good portion of the Latino and the minority community in this country? What do you think? Well,
his hometown of Miami is where I live, and I can tell you that every single day on the radio, in Spanish, this is all that is talked about. Wow. And the lack of response and the lack of leadership. And then when anyone comes on, to defend, they just say that no, Donald Trump was put up. My opponent says Donald Trump was put up by the Clintons. I mean, it is just they can't seem to be able to just say this is wrong, Donald Trump, you're wrong, and you're right. There's a huge percentage from now, it keeps growing, even in Florida, that are just responding to Donald Trump's directness and frankly just ability to say what he feels and what apparently, the base of the Republican Party feels, which is sad to say.
Annette, how's your race going in the 26th down in Florida?
Great. Working hard and, trying to talk to the voters. But again, I'm running against someone that claims to be, to criticize Trump for those reasons, saying that he's just a plant. And but I'm enjoying it.
Your opponent is actually saying that Trump is a plant.
Yes, he says that Trump is a plant. But what's really interesting about Miami? Miami is a very progressive city, and what I'm finding is that I have an opponent that realizes that he can't win with an R next to his name. So he's desperately trying to be a Democrat. Well, I have news. You're not a Democrat. And I am.
Annette, always good to visit. I appreciate your time. We'll do it again. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ed.
Annette Taddeo with us here on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. Now this. It's time to continue our conversation about mechanical insulation. Mechanical insulation is for the piping systems in our nation's commercial and industrial facilities. Facility owners are burning up billions of dollars through the lack of mechanical insulation on these piping systems. Call the iSave team. Insulation saves America valuable energy, and this team of energy conservation specialists is shovel-ready to save you money. Visit iSaveTeam.org to have a specialist give your plant an energy audit.
From the steel mills of Pennsylvania to the auto factories of Michigan to the modern makers movement, manufacturing makes our nation great. I'm Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We bring business and labor together to advocate for policies that everyone can agree on. Together, we can strengthen manufacturing and create good-paying American jobs. Help us keep it made in America.
The Ed Schultz Internet broadcast is brought to you by the Ring of Fire radio show. Listen to the Ring of Fire weekends on radio stations across the country. Get more information and the news of the day at ringofireradio.com.
And we are here every day, Monday through Friday at WeGotEd.com, rawstory.com, ringofireradio.com. So during the CNN interview last night with Donald Trump, another thing caught my attention. A commercial. There was a commercial supporting the Iranian nuclear deal. This has turned into a full-fledged campaign. You can look at polls across the country. A lot of people are losing confidence that the president is headed down the right path with the Iranians, the P5+1 deal. It seems like the Republicans are gaining strength in the public and also votes to knock this thing down. A gentleman who we visited with quite a bit on this, Steve Clemons, who is the Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic. Steve, good to have you with us.
Good morning, Ed.
These commercials, this has evolved into a full-fledged campaign trying to get people to get involved, to call the representatives and senators, especially, to say yes to this thing. Did you anticipate it was going to end up with this chapter?
No, no way. Right now there's just so many odds, twists and turns, both, in the presidential race and also the tactics on how to approach this deal.
Well, this is Trump last night, or recently, should I say, talking about what a bad deal this is. It's almost like he's a walking, talking commercial against it. Here it is.
People, we make this horrible deal for, one of the worst. I think it'll go down as one of the worst deals ever made by a country with another country. And it's going to lead to, whether it's nuclear destruction, you could name lots of bad scenarios, but the deal with Iran is a totally incompetently negotiated transaction.
What about that, Steve?
Well, it's a really interesting thing. Donald Trump is such a complex man because on one hand, he's saying it's a horrible, badly negotiated deal, negotiated by dunces and dummies. He calls John Kerry a dummy and incompetent. At the same time, he did this surprising thing, which I defended him on, yesterday on XM Sirius, where, he said if he came into office, he wouldn't rip up the deals. You don't rip up deals, he said, and he would police the hell out of it. And so to some degree, there's an element of responsibility beneath all that bluster on the deal, which I think also needs to be part of the equation. So, when you look at it, Donald is changing the way gravity works around presidential candidates right now, because normally, under normal conditions, you would break through the bluster and say, what is your better alternative? The only two clear other options are either acquiescing to Iran with a nuclear bomb and a nuclear capacity, or taking military action to try to keep Iran from acquiring the final system of a final bomb that it had, and taking that military action will eventually lead to Iran hardening and defending its research facility, ending up with a bomb and being pissed off at the rest of the world. So you'd normally get that kind of back and forth with a candidate, and we're not getting that with Donald. He's just a lot of bluster. He understands that there's a lot of conservative backlash against this Iran deal, but when he was asked, would you rip up the deal, he said no.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting thing.
Well, it is interesting because it plays into a lot of trade agreements that we have that hurt American jobs, and that's a different subject.
Yeah.
All right, there are some Democrats out there. One of them, most noticeably, Senator Bob Menendez.
Yeah.
He became the second Democratic senator to oppose the deal. And Republicans only need 4 more Democrats to reach a filibuster-proof majority of 60 and deliver a bipartisan pushback on the president. No question they got the votes in the House. How big is Menendez, and what's his thinking on this from your perspective?
Menendez is less significant than one would think because he's damaged goods. He's under ethics investigation and potential indictment for corruption charges. He has a legal defense fund that on one day scored about $150,000 of donations from AIPAC supporters. He's got people like Chaim Saban and Sheldon Adelson who are, very much against the Iran deal. Adelson much more than Saban, but nonetheless, both of them opposed that are big donors to Bob Menendez. And so it's not surprising. And when he was, the Democratic leader on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he acted like a neocon. I mean, he was constantly joining up with the Republicans on bashing the White House on how it was handling Syria, bashing the White House on any number of other fronts where it really was a neoconservative line that he was taking. So his posture is not surprising at all to anyone in this business. His impact is limited because he's damaged goods. And the way in which he went and articulated what he would do if he were to redo this deal is so in the weeds and so kind of weird that it's had almost no impact on the debate.
What about Schumer?
Schumer's a big deal. Chuck Schumer is not damaged goods. Chuck Schumer is they say in the way to read power, Ed, is kind of like the stock market. It's not what your stock is today. It's what people think it will be in 10 years, what it will be in 5 years. And Schumer's star has been on the rise. The purported successor to Harry Reid, leading the Democrats in the U.S. Senate. He has long defined himself as a friend and ally of Israel, and so he's created space for people to go against the Iran deal and to take on Obama if they want.
Steve, we all know how this thing works in Washington. There's a lot of horse trading going on. There are, some senators who know what Schumer's position is going to be, may call in a few markers and favors on down the road if they stand with Schumer to oppose this deal.
Well,
that's the scary thing of it all. Is so some serious politics being played here instead of principle about what we're going to do about the nuclear capability of the Iranians.
I think that's right. I think that there are a couple of things going on where it shifted, because I think that progressives and groups like Move On and the various groups out there that have really punished Schumer relentlessly for what he's done was a shock to them. And Schumer has been sending signals to people that he's not going to twist arms like he said he was going to do against the deal. So he's backed off. That's a good thing. And there are people like Joe Manchin, Senator Manchin, and others I've spoken to who've come out and basically reassured Schumer that they still support him in the leadership challenge that he'll have next year.
It's going to come down to a swing vote, isn't it? It's going to come down to one vote.
It's going to come down pretty close,
Yeah. Steve Clemons, always great to visit. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much. We'll do it again. I appreciate it. Thank you. Steve Clemons, Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic. This is the Ed Schultz News and Commentary Internet production at WeGotIt.com, RawStory.com, RingOfFireRadio.com, brought to you by Communication Workers of America, Alliance for American Manufacturing, BioGreen Clean, and the iSave team. We're back tomorrow.